And good evening, friends. Hope y'all are having a great Monday start to the week. Can't ask for anything more. Why is Moose and I in a really good mood, you may wonder? Because we have choreographed a dance to go along with the theme song. Yes. Good evening to Jimmy Hill. Good evening to past Commander in Chief, the Legend Paul Graham, Jr., Jack DuPont, and Daniel, and Gerald, and John, and Lauren, and Alan, and Sue, and everybody else out there in SCV Chatland. Hope y'all are having a great Monday and ready for a historical talk. Remember, views and opinions expressed on this program are not necessarily those of the SCV, HGC, and Division Brigade camps, subsidiaries, strictly those of us who express them. You couldn't understand what I said. Read what's going across the screen right now.
All right, I'm not going to say what happened, but there's no way you started the show the way you did.
Yes, it is.
That is just evil. I didn't even realize what time it was, and so I was caught up in the pre-show.
You were just talking away. You just talking away in pre-show and
boom. Yeah. That one hit me like a ton. I don't know if I can recover from this.
Yeah, you got five. You have 5 more days. Actually, Jude, we started about 20 seconds early on our end.
You started on time, LOL. Wow, that hurt.
Ooh, I just got an email. I wonder who it's from.
That might be the most random start to a pre-show ending. Well, let me rephrase it. That might be the weirdest pre-show ending we've done in 4 years of this show.
Well, if we ever could launch I don't know, behind the scenes screaming and streaming platform to where people can see what goofiness happens between 6:30 and 7 o'clock.
That's scary. We might want to. The views and opinions needs to be strengthened if we're going to show behind the scenes. It gets rough.
We were watching a clip from a certain animated situation. Well, it's not a situational comedy. It's a social satire that offends everyone.
It does, and I was laughing at it, but at the same time, I was like, why is this weirdness happening? And then out of nowhere, it's just like, we're live. Time to get into a serious discussion tonight. I'm like, oh, wow, that's not a way to start one of these.
Speaking of people in the chat that are still coming in, David Pope, good evening. Remember, everybody, if you have not, go follow the Douglas Southall Freeman page and his chats that he has. Victor, good evening. The Lone Ranger, Chuck McMichael, Jack, we've already said hello to you. Good seeing you this past weekend. But it was also great for us to see our historian, we had our historian in chief, but we also had our Lieutenant Commander in Chief, Walter D. Donnie Kennedy, and his twin brother, Ron Kennedy, there at Beauvoir for Jefferson Davis's birthday. Great time was had by many.
It was a rounding. It was a success.
A rousing celebration.
So yeah, that's why you can't start the show.
But we had a really great time celebrating our Confederate heritage. I know Florida had their reunion this past weekend. I hope everything went great there. I know we're right in the middle of reunion season right now. Alabama has theirs this weekend. So does Mississippi, and it is an election year.
And someone's turned out.
Yep.
I do want to say I tried to get the Mississippi Division Commander on
soon to be passed
for a State of the Division address, but he refused. He didn't want to be on.
No, Mississippi is not in the Union.
What did a State of the Division address?
You said you started to say State of the Union.
Force of habit. We all know what I was trying to do with the title of that series.
Yeah. But no, I will not be able to do that because I will be en route to reunion, and I can't drive and talk on chat at the same time.
Well, yeah.
Much to my chagrin. I know Susie's driving, but she'll try to chime in, and nobody wants that.
We have the SCV chat historian Michael C. Hardy in the chat. Good to see you. Moose is a great PowerPoint switch. Why,
He
thank you.
he
I work.
really he really is. He doesn't. He's starting, and this was a great uh a really great learning. I wish we'd have thought about this earlier in our career, because he answers very well to. And if I'd have known that, we could have gone through training and everything like that. Um, so yeah.
I was responding to the thumbs up. You were just like all of a
Well,
sudden you switched to snapping.
well, I thought you had your back to the door, and please remember, if you see any pictures of me, the door's cracked open just enough for my arm to go through and bend. So I'm sitting there like,
The poor computer didn't work for the first slide too, which was pretty funny.
oh,
It just
bad news.
exited out of the whole thing, and I was like, "That's joyful."
But it was great. We didn't get a chance to go live with it, and I hate that we didn't. But at the same time, because the Jefferson Davis, the High Road to Emancipation, which has been our sponsor for this part of the season, the Kennedy Twins' newest book, you can get it on the Kennedy Twins website or at Beauvoir or on the Amazon or the SCV website. Um, any of those. Uh, they talked about it, and I want to do a full in-depth review of the book um, pretty soon. Pretty soon. I will
Okay.
say. I will say that I am very interested now because I didn't have a copy. I want to get a copy, but if you have the book, was Jeff Davis right? It is the expanded version of it.
Hmm. I have. I ended up with both somehow. But yeah, we'll bring them on hopefully soon, and we will be talking about that book in much greater detail. Wait till Moose sees the gif I have for him. Evil laugh. Um.
Hope
I
it's another moose costume.
don't need another moose
Hey,
costume at my.
pause really quickly. Stanley White wrote up, my first lieutenant commander for another 5 days. While you are watching this, I need you to repair a report or prepare a report that will need to take about 15 minutes on Saturday. No pressure.
Did you just give out an order on our live broadcast?
Meh.
Yeah, I got 5 days.
Anyway, no, Victor Smith, no, Victor Smith. Good evening, hippie. No, Victor Smith. It is not happening. Not this year. Definitely not this year because this year is not a national election year. Not next year. Not. I am going to sit back and uh, I've got some stuff that I haven't been able to do as division commander that I will talk to Moose about doing on the not this upcoming Thursday show, but the Thursday after if he's free. Not a state of the division, but a where are we going now?
Ooh, future of SCV chat update.
No,
Oh wow. Okay. Well, I'm sorry. I'll just leave. I don't
yes,
know.
no. There, I am already Victor. I am already the noble lumpkin of the Holy Roman Imperial monastic liquiditarian. Did I say imperial? I think I did spatula cavalry, and that's enough for me.
We have your official title somewhere. There it is. Let's see if we can.
Yeah, well, leave off the official title of the order.
We have your official title on the SCV chat website that everybody should check out.
What's that URL again?
www.scvchat.com.
Co-host, Chief Operating Officer,
Yeah, I still have
Noble
that.
Lumpkin of the Spatula Cavalry,
Yeah,
Male
we
Stick Bear, Traveling Bard, self-appointed president of the Anti-Temperance League and Liquiditarian Party.
and then
We are taking applications for the Anti-Temperance League and Liquiditarian Party.
oh, it's gonna be one of those episodes.
No, it's not, because we're going to get into our topic and be serious for a little while. All right, so if you've been following us for the past 6 months, you will notice that we have been in a theme. What has our theme been, Moose?
Well, simply put, the heroes of our heroes.
And to expound on it, the South was right in 1861 because America was right in 1776. So we've been doing an in-depth study into the American Revolution and the Southern influences that were there, as well as the influences of the Revolution onto the Second War for American Independence. Sorry, brain fart there. We have covered great men like George Washington.
Oh.
John Paul Jones.
John Paul Jones, the Patriot movie, the Swamp Fox.
Right, Francis Marion. The Battle of Kings Mountain. What else?
That's all we've done.
I
think that's all we.
No, we've also done an in-depth look at Robert E. Lee's family, specifically his father, Light Horse Harry Lee, and Richard Henry Lee, the Lees of Old Virginia.
So we still got what, 3 more episodes in this series?
We have tonight's episode.
Mm-hmm.
We have next month's episode, which last month we did the Sword of the American Revolution, George Washington. Tonight we're doing the Voice of the American Revolution, Patrick Henry. And next month we are doing the Pen of the American Revolution, Thomas Jefferson. Just in time for the 4th of July and the secession holiday that we all celebrate. We should do Thomas Paine there, Chuck McMichael, but we have put it out to you, the chat heads, and we'll be doing an official poll thing a little bit everywhere. Lee, you're right. We will be doing an official poll here in the next little bit. So the way, if y'all are new to this season of chat, the way we operate is we separate our seasons into half years. The first half of the year is from January to July. And then we do the national reunion coverage and everything like that. And then we take about 2 weeks off, and then we go into the next half of the year. So what we will be doing with our chat heads on the Facebook page, and if you're signed up for our website, and as well as National Reunion, we may have some cards made up. Should we continue on with the heroes of our heroes for the rest of the year, or should we move on to something else? I have an idea for the something else. Moose doesn't know my idea for the something else.
Interesting.
Put it like this: it's based on books.
Books. As historians, that really narrows it down.
Oh, fiction books.
Oh, really?
Literature. Talking
Mm.
about Southern authors. So those are your. I too like books. Those are your options. We can either do continuing on, or we could talk about Southern authors like Flannery O'Connor, Harper Lee, that man in North Mississippi that wrote that book. It's William Faulkner. It's an inside family joke. Walter
That hurt me.
Percy, Shelby Foote, um,
Ooh.
Douglas Southall Freeman. Even though he did not write literature, he wrote historical, actual stuff. Things like that. So
Interesting. I like that topic. I'm not gonna lie.
like I said, Eudora Welty, that's another one. Southern history and Southern culture has influenced American history and
Michael C.
American
Hardy.
culture. Yeah. Southern history and Southern culture and American history and American culture so much. Pause for a second. You just gave me an idea. I do think it'd be great to have Michael come on and talk for an hour about himself.
That
Um,
would be amazing.
I think he would hate us and hate it.
Oh yeah, he
Um,
would. A humble man hates having to sit down and brag about himself, and to make him do it for an hour in the front of, at the minimum, 1,000 people.
anyway, um,
Oh
so
gosh.
yeah, so that's where we are. Like I said, we'll launch that poll and stuff around National Reunion time. So we can definitely start looking into planning that out. So
Ooh.
y'all be thinking, what do y'all? Because this show is driven by you, the chat heads, uh, but funded by us for now and our lovely sponsors.
Yes, thank you.
Speaking of sponsors, if you're not signed up on the website, go ahead. We're going to go ahead and tell you we're doing a giveaway.
Oh
We're not going
yeah.
to tell you what we're giving away.
Gotta
We're not
guess.
telling you. The only way that you can enter this giveaway is to sign up for the website and be at National Reunion. So there's your
Do
deadline.
we want to quickly show them how to sign up for the website?
Nope. Do it Thursday.
Okay.
Because we've got a great man to talk about, and we've got a lot of information to cover about Patrick Henry.
A lot.
Right, Moose? You do any research this time?
Yes, I've done research the majority of times.
Okay. Well, where was Patrick Henry born?
Patrick Henry was born in Virginia while it was still a colony in Studley, Virginia.
No, well, kind of. Patrick Henry was born at Studley Plantation in
Uh,
Hanover County, Virginia on May 29th, 1736. His father, John Henry, was a Scottish born planter, and his mother, Sarah Winston Smith, who was a young widow from a prominent Virginia gentry family, was of English descent. Henry, now pay attention to that portion right there, because it kind of gets a little bit uh, ironic later on when we begin talking about the religious influence on Patrick Henry's life. Anyway, his father had immigrated from Aberdeenshire around 1730 ish. 1720s, 1730s. He had attended King's College, the University of Aberdeen, before moving to the Virginias, but he settled in Hanover County around 1732. Then, of course, you had Patrick. Patrick Henry was named for his uncle, Patrick Henry, who was an Anglican or Episcopal minister. And this is where I was talking about the irony in in Patrick Henry, or at least the religious upbringing. Patrick, though, would until his uncle's death sign and often went by Patrick Henry Jr. There where he lived, there were not many schools, and he attended a local school until, well, I say schools, academies rather, until about the age of 10. You got to remember, during that era, you got your basic reading, writing, arithmetic, that sort of stuff done. And then for your actual classical education, which would have been Greek, Latin, higher points of mathematics and stuff like that, you went to an academy and then a university for. Digressing though, because there were no academies, he was tutored by his father at home. Um, and during that time, during his young age, Patrick Henry did what pretty much every other boy did during the time. He learned how to play the violin, taking up music, dancing, and he was particularly fond rather of hunting. Um, Now, since the family's considerable lands and stuff were from Sarah's first marriage, and primogeniture was the big thing, Patrick was said to never inherit anything. The stuff would pass to his older brother John Smith Jr. So he needed a way to make his way into the world, and at the age of 15, he became a clerk for a local merchant. And a year later, he actually operated and opened a store with his brother, but the store failed. Um, yeah.
Bless his heart. Didn't and I'm guessing you're about to get into his short-lived farming career.
No, that goes later on after he's married.
I could have swore he failed at a tobacco farm before
He
his
did.
marriage and then after.
No, no, at least not the research that I found.
Mm,
Um, I mean, from everything that I found in my research, that he received the as a wedding gift a farm,
mhm.
and as well as a couple of slaves. And the farm was about 300 acres, and it was called Pine Slash Farm, and it was near Mechanicsville. So even though he worked in the fields with his slaves and stuff like that, because of earlier cultivations of tobacco, which, if you don't know, tobacco will strip the nutrients of the soil if you don't do crop rotation. um, and the fact that there was a couple of droughts during that time, he didn't have a real successful tenure. Oh, and then the house burnt down. But let me digress for a second before getting into that. uh, I really want to get into this portion while it's on my mind about um, Patrick Henry and the religion, that was uh, religious influence that was on his life. So when Patrick Henry was a kid, the first great awakening hit Virginia. And his father, although being from Scotland, was staunchly Anglican. But his mother, who was of English descent, took him often to hear Presbyterian preachers, who at that time were hellfire and brimstone. Um, that's where the irony comes in. You would think that his father, being from Scotland, would be more apt for the Presbyterian faith, or denomination rather, because he would. We lost Moose, and he's back. He would, come from that area, and his mother, being of English descent, would be more prominently Anglican. But still, she took him, around to different stuff. Just a fun little twist of fate. And anyway, that would eventually um, affect Patrick Henry, because as governor, and during his term in the legislature, and for all of his life, he would uh, go ahead and fight for um, religious liberty throughout Virginia. In fact, in the Virginia Ratifying Convention in 1788, he said that religion is the duty which we owe our Creator, and the manner of discharging it can be directly only by reason and conviction, not by force or violence, excuse me. And therefore, all men have an equal, natural, and unalienable right to the free exercise of religion according to the dictates of consciousness, and that no particular religious sect nor society ought to be favored or established by the laws in preference to the others. And we'll get into some court cases after he became a lawyer, that we'll talk about with the clergy and things like that, because you have to again remember from your earlier years that the that there was an established religion in New England, or excuse me, in Old Country England, as well as in the colonies, Anglicanism. Nothing against Anglicanism whatsoever. I've attended several Anglican services or Episcopal services, but Henry did not agree with that. He believed that all, like we just said, all men have the right to practice whatever religion as they want, as they feel is due to their God. Um, this is also the same time that, and I'm going to digress a little bit here on Henry's life. Um, for a couple of years now, I have had the opportunity to portray Judah P. Benjamin. Judah P. Benjamin being the only member of the Confederate cabinet to not own slaves at the time of the war, and first openly Jewish man who served on a cabinet position on the North American continent. Um, the reason why his family settled in the South is because of the religious tolerance that the South showed in the antebellum period. In fact, the largest Jewish population at the eve of the war was in Charleston, South Carolina. There were laws in New England with all those Yankees up there that forbade Jews to have the right to vote until the 1830s. Stuff like that. So again, Patrick Henry was, leading on that charge. And again, that is a Southern tradition that I'm proud that we, continue on to this day. So, digressing back to Patrick Henry. As we just mentioned, well, let me talk about it for a second. In 1754, Henry married Sarah Shelton. Slaves, 6 slaves, 300-acre plantation. Ended up being exhausted. There were some droughts. The field was overworked. House burned down. Dog had worms. And Henry finally gave up and moved with his wife to Hanover Tavern, which was owned by his wife's father. Now, there are a lot of historians, and indeed, Thomas Jefferson wrote later that he was just a barkeep, and that's not 100% true. He was a host. Did he serve sometimes as serving, bar? Yes, but I mean, it's also an inn, so he was more like an innkeeper than anything. Joe Collier, as far as signing up for the Telegraph, you've got to that you just got to work with headquarters on that. So anyway, David Pope, as far as reproduction of the Confederate Book of Common Prayer, I think I found one a couple of months ago on a website. I'll have to check and see if it's sold or not. Digressing back. Self-promotion. I actually wrote a book about the Battle of Hanover Courthouse. Check out the book about Hanover Courthouse. Anyway, but he was more of an innkeeper than actual barkeep.
He was very successful at this venture, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was. In fact, that's where he met a 17-year-old Thomas Jefferson, who was en route to the College of William and Mary. And Jefferson, in his own memoirs, later on said that his first year there at William and Mary, he was a little bit kind of like my first semester, and I'm sure Moose's first, second, third, and fourth semesters of college. A little bit wild, but
don't bring Ole Miss into this.
But despite their 6 years in difference in age, they became friends. And in fact, Jefferson often had Henry attend lectures at William and Mary. With Jefferson had Henry, come to those lectures with him too. And there he was briefly under the tutelage of St. George Tucker. So there was that going on. Let's fast forward in Jefferson's life, or not Jefferson, excuse me, that's next month, Henry's life, to the time when he began practicing law. Despite hanging out with Thomas Jefferson, despite attending lectures at William and Mary, despite working a full-time job as an innkeeper or host at Hanover Tavern, Henry was able to find time to study the law. And you have to remember that back in the day, you didn't have a law exam. You went and well, you did have a bar exam, but it wasn't like the bar exam we think about it now. You would go and you would work under an attorney for a certain amount of time, and it's not sure on how long Henry did um, actually practice. Henry himself said, or not practice, but study under the attorney. He said it was a little less than a month. Eh. But he was able to study the law, and in 1860 he applied for a lawyer's license, and he appeared before the bar of examiners. They were prominent attorneys in the colonial capital of Williamsburg, and the attorneys were very impressed by Henry's mind, even though he wasn't exactly knowledgeable on legal procedures. Things like making a motion, not making a motion, but objecting, all that good stuff, procedural stuff, kind of like Vinny. Not our cousin Vinny, but Vinny from my cousin Vinny. That's confusing. Anyway, he passed the exam in April of 1760 and opened up his own practice. And he began appearing in courts in Hanover and all nearby counties. During the droughts of the 1750s, there was another drought. It led to a rise in the price. Actually, excuse me. This drought would have been the same drought that would have affected him before the house burnt down and the dog got worms and he moved on to the father's tavern. Anyway, the price of tobacco rose because basic laws of supply and demand. Supply went down, demand was still what it was. In fact, went up. And currency was very scarce in Virginia. The salaries in the colony were often actually expressed in terms of pounds of tobacco. So Moose would work for me for 10 pounds of tobacco a year that he could sell or whatever, and that was how he was paid. Prior to the drought, though, the price of tobacco had long been 2 pence per pound. And in 1775 and 78, the Virginia House of Burgesses elected to lower that was lower house. They passed the Two Penny Act, which allowed debts expressed in tobacco to be paid at the rate of 2 pence per pound for a limited time. These payees included public officials, including Anglican clergy, because that was the established church, and several ministers petitioned the Board of Trade in London to overrule the House, which it did. 5 clergymen then brought lawsuits for payback. These cases were known as the Parsons case, and the only one of them that was successful was a James Mowry. And a jury was impaled in Hanover County on December 1st, 63. Whew, mine's a terrible thing to waste. To fix the damages. Henry was engaged as counsel by the local parish vestry for this hearing. And his father was the presiding judge. Anyway, the case goes on, and it gets time to closing arguments and stuff like that. And everybody is expecting, brief summarization of, what they should. Henry rails on for an hour, completely ignoring the questions of damages. And this is why he's the voice of the revolution. He ignores the question of damages, but focuses on the unconstitutionality of the veto of the Two Penny Act by the king's government. And Henry deemed that any king who annulled good laws, such as the Two Penny Act, was a tyrant who, quote, forfeits all of his rights of his subjects' obedience. And the clergy then began challenging the impartial law designed to bring economic relief, had shown themselves to be enemies of the community. And of course, guess what happens?
Treason.
Exactly. Moose, you got a text message?
They can wait.
Yeah. Anyway, in Patrick Henry's speech, he does say that they should only. He suggested that the jury just return the damages of 1 farthing. Actually, he said that Maury, the priest, should be or minister should be shouldn't be given that much money. I hate my notes when I do them quickly in the afternoon. And anyway, they only paid him one farthing. Um, this really began to get Henry a following, and especially in the backwoods of Virginia, because he defended the liberties of the common people and had a very friendly manner and was very outspoken. And anyway, he gets elected to the House of Burgesses in December of '63. Well, that's what kicks it off. Excuse me. Um,
I have a question, teacher.
yes,
Actually,
'65.
just something I wanted though in there to that case because when I read it,
Oh, I'm getting water.
all right. When I originally read it, I found it fascinating. Great men in history, they're hard to keep down. And we've talked about a couple of Patrick Henry's failed ventures, his work career. When he first started speaking, there was an account that he was very soft spoken, very quiet, almost mumbling his speech, and that's nowhere near the Patrick Henry we all know. But and his father who was of course the judge, was hanging his head in shame because his father, he thought his son was about to make a fool of himself in front of everybody. But by the end of the speech he gave at this court case, it is reported that his father was crying because of how proud he was of his son. What?
No, I agree. A watery tart handing out swords is no way to determine executive power.
I'll take this nice moment from history. Patrick Henry is knocked down over and over and over again, and he gets this big break. It takes him a minute to build up his confidence. Even his father's hanging his head in shame, and by the end of it, his father's weeping. And you talk about a watery tart.
It's no system of a form of government. Gerald is right. Continue.
That was it. That was the story.
Okay, moving on to Patrick Henry. Digressing back. So anyway, we're back in 1670. Moose has dyslexia and it's contagious. Moving back to 1765, Patrick Henry wins a seat in the House of Burgesses, and his career in the lower house of the colonial legislature began really growing, especially when Parliament decided to pass the Stamp Act. And Henry began trying to get the leadership of the House of Burgesses to oppose it. But Henry was more outspoken and direct in his opposition to the parliamentary tax than the entire House was. By narrow margins on May 29th through 30th of 1765, the Burgess finally endorsed Henry's Stamp Act resolves, which he attacked Parliament's claim of authority to tax the colonies and seemed to advocate resistance of the imperial government if they persisted in its course. Now, again, this is 1765. This is before the revolution really begins taking place, or thought to be taking place, up in Boston. This is a Virginian, a Southerner, who is starting the revolution, the idea of revolution, the idea that we don't have to adhere to an unjust parliamentary system that's taxing us without representation. And to a king who is a tyrant because he is allowing for just laws passed by his subjects to be overturned. Anyway, Henry's Stamp Act resolves were published throughout the colonies in Great Britain. It's established Henry's place amongst the leaders of the American revolutions. Let's also pause for a second and realize that Henry puts his neck out on the line.
Yeah.
The Stamp Act, he could have very well been caught, drawn, quartered, uh, burnt at the stake afterwards, and forfeit all of his lands, properties, titles. So he's doing this for the good of the people. Anyway, the passage of the Stamp Act resolve was the occasion for one of the most famous orations, the Caesar Brutus speech, in which he suggested that the British monarch risked a fate like Julius Caesar again, saying that the king would be killed by Brutus or Cassius or Charles the First displacement by Cromwell if he permitted his government to disregard American liberty. This would be this is in that time in the English mindset pure treason. And despite those cries of treason from the more cautious burgesses, his
Can
spirited
I say
remarks
a funny quote?
achieved their effects. Yeah.
I just love this quote while we're talking about treason from Henry saying, "If it be treason, make the most of it."
Yeah. Uh,
Got a good chuckle out of that during my
yeah.
research.
With attendance that was thinned by the early departure of many members because they didn't want any part of it, Henry did get 5 of the intended seven resolutions. He felt it was necessary to hold back 2 of the stronger ones that faced defeat in order, to get the other ones that passed. One was later rescinded, but newspapers printed versions of all 6 or 7 of the resolutions. So yeah, uh, he kind of lit the match, so to speak, and tensions between the colonists and the British government began to heat up. Things began heating up quite drastically over the next couple of years. But Henry remained a member of the House of Burgesses, and he occasionally challenged the older leaders that were always, but always joining them in opposition to British policies. He was able to balance his public career by the needs of with the needs of a growing family and law practice. Um, about 10 years into it, in 1769, Henry was admitted to practice before the General Court, which was the highest judicial body in the colony. Um, Things got a lot worse the next year with the Boston Massacre in 1770. And in 1773, Patrick Henry joined with other Virginians in establishment of the Intercolonial Committees of Correspondence. Both the Boston Tea Party in December and Parliament's subsequent enactment of the Coercive Acts and its closing of the Port of Boston in 74 drew the colonies together in their resistance. Again, Henry is starting to weave together the colonies into a, bringing forth that idea of American independence. That we just like the cartoon of that Ben Franklin did. I believe I can't remember if it was Franklin or Paul Revere, but join or die
It was
type
Ben.
deal. Uh, Henry actually attended the first session of the Continental Congress in September of 74 as one of Virginia's 7 delegates and received several important committee engagements. Early in the session, though, he demonstrated his powers as a speaker and he asserted the old governments and colonial boundaries were swept away. The distinctions between Virginians, Pennsylvanians, New Yorkers, New Englanders are no more. I'm not a Virginian, but I'm an American, he said. Again, an idea that was trying to get all the colonies to realize they needed to strike the same bell at once. Henry took his seat in the Second Continental Congress in May of 75, but was a little bit more cautious in the deliberations. When Congress adjourned on August 1st of 75, he set for home and he never held a continental or national office after that. Henry, for the first few months between the first and second sessions of the Continental Congress, returned to Virginia and organized a volunteer militia company for Hanover County. And while also co-opting with the tragedy of Sarah Henry's severe mental illness that required around-the-clock care. So he goes to raise a militia, and Sarah's not doing too good. When Sarah Henry died sometime in early 1775, Henry resumed an active leadership role in the Revolution, particularly at the Second Virginia Convention at Richmond in 1775. The Virginia delegates were divided between those who wanted only peaceful solution to the dispute with the British Empire and those who were ready to prepare for a military resistance. Henry led the call for preparedness and introduced a resolution to that effect. And he supported its passage with the legendary speech that closed with, "Give me liberty or give me death." Henry carried the day by no more than half a dozen votes.
Which is also considering how many great speeches this man gave in his life. To talk about how this was a knockout of the park, even for him, a lot of historians today still call it one of his, if not one of his best speeches, if not the best speech he gave in his life. Go read it. It is very nice. It's amazing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Hello.
We missed our Pop-Tart break.
We did miss our Pop-Tart break. Let me give me 5 minutes to get the everything ready, and then we'll give one.
Yeah, so give me liberty, give me death. Virginia's Royal Governor John Murray responded promptly with the threat of armed resistance, and on April 20th, 75, dispatched a small force of British Marines to seize gunpowder and firelocks stored at the public magazine in Williamsburg. The Marines were discovered, but an attempt aroused violent sentiments that threatened to explode into bloodshed. A few of Virginia's more cautious leaders, who had often opposed Henry in the legislature, were able to quiet the citizens of Williamsburg ahead of a march on the capital by several volunteer companies that gathered at Fredericksburg. Patrick Henry was not as easily turned aside, though. He led his Hanover militia company to the outskirts of Williamsburg and demanded payment to the colony for the cost of the seized powder and arms before he finally agreed to break camp. You ready?
Yes, I'm ready.
Okay, so we'll be right back.
Wait! No, we got to do the sponsor. The stick.
Do it.
Well, give me a minute to have it. All right, tonight's Pop-Tart break is, of course, sponsored by Jefferson Davis High Road to Emancipation and Constitutional Government. Jefferson Davis High Road to Emancipation and Constitutional Government is about how Jefferson Davis was a leader in the high road to emancipation. He looked for a day in which slaves would be prepared to live and participate in society. He did more, though, than advocate for this high road for emancipation. He practiced his beliefs in the ultimate emancipation of Southern slaves. Many of his former slaves left for prosperity, and their testimony about their former master, who prepared them to be a self-sustaining member of society. You can get the Kennedy Twins' newest book, Jefferson Davis High Road to Emancipation and Constitutional Government, at www.kennedy-twins.com and most online bookstores, including scv.org, and visit beauvoir.com.org. And thank you again, the Kennedy Twins, for sponsoring tonight's Pop-Tart break, and we will be right back.
Yep.
I've always been proud of my Confederate ancestry, but I never pursued becoming a member of the Sons of Confederate Veterans. It all changed in 2017 when I saw New Orleans take down their Confederate statues. Those monuments come down really lit a fire inside of me, and came to the conclusion I needed to join the Sons of Confederate Veterans. It's a domino effect. We give in on this, it's just a matter of time before they start taking down Thomas Jefferson and George Washington. We need to draw the line in the sand right now. These are our Confederate monuments, these are our Southern heroes, and you're not going to take them down. Our museum is going to be funded 100% by the Sons of Confederate Veterans. The history, the narrative that we present will be the narrative that we write, so it will be our story, our museum. Right now, if we do not protect our heritage and present it as it truly was, it's going to be lost forever. we're going to tell the true story here. I'm Adam Southern, and I'm a proud descendant of Private Alfred D. Southern, a Confederate veteran.
You know what I love about that video, Moose?
What?
The fact that you can see how much progress we have made on our National Museum from in such short time, and how even with the If Walls Could Talk video, there's more progress that has been made where we're telling the story of the South for future generations. And we tell stories of things like the American Revolution that we're talking about now, the Second War for American Independence in 1861 to 1865, the terribleness of that was Reconstruction, and everything about the South. If you've not been to our museum, it's your museum. You need to go. It was open this past weekend. It's ours. It's something I'm very proud of. I'm proud to see the progress that has been made.
Here, here.
So, anyway, back to Patrick Henry. Henry is when last we talked about him, he just got done dealing with the British Marines, and during Henry's brief absence from Virginia in the Second Continental Congress, they took his advice and began doing military preparations. And in fact, they formed two provincial regiments and put Henry as the command of the regiments, even though he was inexperienced. He was the senior officer of the 1st Regiment. And George Washington said, "I think my countrymen made a capital mistake," again, countrymen being Virginians, when they took Henry out of the Senate and put him in the field, which is really a high compliment about his political, legal, and oratorial skills and his mindset. That he would be better suited making the laws instead of defending the rights to make the laws.
Patrick Henry is, I think some historians have said that, that conversation with Washington hurt his ego, but he had a lot of respect for Washington and decided he was going to at least give it a shot to go back and see what good he could do.
Yeah.
Ended up doing a lot of good.
Yeah, but I would see that more as a compliment than an insult. But Henry was he had very little difficulty in recruiting troops from his body of supporters. But in the end, his political opponents thwarted his military ambition. They dominated the Committee of Safety and dispatched a 2nd Regiment to fight Dunmore's forces at the Battle of Great Bridge in Norfolk County, Virginia in 1775 instead of sending Henry. In early 76, when the two regiments were incorporated into the newly organized Continental Army, Henry remained a colonel in command of his regiment, but he was placed under the command of his former subordinates. At that point, he got sick, anyway, he resigned his commission.
Mm-hmm.
But even though his short-lived military career was at an end, his political career was just beginning. The colonies began moving more and more towards independence, and Henry was elected to the last of Virginia's Revolutionary Conventions, which met in Williamsburg on May 6, 1776. During the next 2 months, the Virginians instructed their delegates at the Continental Congress to declare independence. Again, Richard Henry Lee and the Lee Virginia Resolution, whatever you want to call it. They wrote a new constitution for the state and adopted the Virginia Declaration of Rights, which was a precursor to the American Bill of Rights. And without assurances of a strong union between the colonies and foreign support, such as an alliance with France, Henry was initially reluctant to support independence. Though once these questions, however, he participated in drafting Virginia's resolution calling upon Congress to declare the colonies free and independent. At that point, he began
becoming. Are we going
governor.
there?
Yeah, governor.
First governor of Virginia.
Yeah. Let you talk about that. Moose, my eyes are starting to go cross-eyed.
Oh, that's fine. Not only was Patrick Henry the first governor of Virginia. He served for 3 very successful terms. And let's see here, I'm trying to find the quote. And a quote from some of the people that served with him during this time was Henry appeared to be in his element, which he was born for. During those, I think there were 1-year terms, if I'm not mistaken. So during these next 3 years, Patrick Henry, not only did he just knock it out of the ballpark, but he did everything he could because again, we've talked about the whole show. He was a man that just couldn't sit there. He took the oath of office when he was still sick in bed. And even from that bed, he was making big decisions, trying to help the Continental Army. He always was continuously trying to recruit troops, trying to get them equipment, trying to make sure that our men on that field could be fed, well equipped, and of course in uniform. So he never stopped. And during those 3 terms, he was, again, pretty successful, and he goes down in Virginia history because of that. Now, after a short time, I do think he gets remarried during this time as well.
Does to a former daughter of one of his clients,
Yes.
Dorothea Dandridge.
And I think at some point he steps down as governor. He doesn't step down. He doesn't go for a 4th term.
Hey, here's a little bit of trivia for you.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know who Dorothea Dandridge's father, Nathaniel Dandridge, was?
Off the top of my head.
Martha Washington's uncle. So she was first cousins to George's wife, which made them closer.
That's wow! I didn't know that. Awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I'm trying to remember because my notes are a little bit less specific than yours. What he did after he stepped down.
Well, first let's look at some of the stuff that he did while he was governor. So when Washington and his troops were encamped at Valley Forge in the winter of 77 to 78, like you were talking about, Henry personally arranged for livestock and other food to be sent to their relief. He sent an unsigned letter that was in response to a gentleman from Philadelphia who did not like Washington. Things of that year. In an effort to secure Virginia's vast claims to the west, all the way to the Mississippi River and north to present-day Minnesota, against the British and Native American forces, Henry, in December of 77, sent George Rogers Clark on an expedition up that way and try to kick butt at a French settlement. This part of Clark's mission was secret, but his public orders merely stated that he was to raise militia, go to Kentucky, then part of Virginia, capture the Native American in July, and Clark did capture the Native American in July and remain north of the Ohio River for the remainder of Henry's governorship. Although the expedition did not turn out all as well as it hoped, Henry trumpeted its success. But then he did go away and stepped down as governor and was elected to the House of Delegates, the lower house of the Virginia legislature.
He was very very persistent in the fact that he wanted to help that area. He didn't want to go on a county, a state level because of his ill health. That's something I just want to throw out there, as I felt like from going from governor of the state of Virginia to just being on the local governing body. I mean, he wanted to do everything he could, no matter how old or how sick he felt at the time.
Anyway, so the Constitution actually of 1776 in Virginia only allowed him to have three consecutive terms. So he was term limited out. But one of his last acts was trying to get the Continental Navy to come and help, secure the Chesapeake Bay. And much to his chagrin, they didn't come, and the British destroyed some very valuable supplies there. But being termed out, and with his buddy Thomas Jefferson being the next governor of Virginia, he returned to his new home at Leatherwood. While at Leatherwood, he devoted himself to local affairs in the thinly populated county. Was given on the seat of the county court, the local governing body, as prominent landowners were, and on the parish vestry, Anglican parish vestry. He refused to be elected a delegate to Congress, stating that his personal businesses and past illnesses made that impossible. Jefferson actually sent him a note in early 1780 about that. Henry replied in gratitude, but just he just didn't want to do it.
Yeah.
Anyway, he gets reelected or gets sent to the House of Delegates, but health problems reoccurred, and it caused him to have to go back home. While in Richmond, which the capital had been moved there, Henry opposed the congressional plan to revalue continental currency and impose certain taxes, feeling it would mostly benefit the North. He was successful in defeating it, but after he left Richmond, supporters persuaded the legislature to pass it. Once he returned home, he was heavily involved in efforts to recruit local volunteers to suppress a band of loyalists. Again, look back at the episode we did on Kings Mountain, who were conducting raids into the frontier area. Henry rode with his troops, although he did not lead them, and they were generally successful in suppressing resistance. The volunteers finally disbanded, though, in September of 1780. The few months later, in January of 1781, British forces under the command of former American General Benedict Arnold. Anybody know where he was from? Anybody? Benedict Arnold? Anybody? You know, Moose? Connecticut.
Connecticut.
Yeah, Yankee.
Huh.
Anyway, he sailed up the James River and he captured Richmond with little opposition. And Henry and Governor Jefferson, the future President Jefferson, they went on the run. They ended up fleeing to Charlottesville, Virginia. They were almost captured when Tarleton raided Charlottesville, but they were able to flee to Staunton. There's a story that Henry fled with other prominent leaders and sought refuge at the home of a woman who initially spurned them as cowards for fleeing Charlottesville. But on learning Henry was with the group, she decided it must be all right and offered them the best that she had. Anyway, so we have the siege of Yorktown. That happens. America wins. Hooray! Henry gets back into the House of Delegates. He sponsored several resolutions to repeal the trade embargo against Great Britain. He introduced legislation to permit loyalists to return to Virginia, even though there was considerable opposition to that. In fact, he said during the debate, "Shall we, who have laid the proud British line to rest at our feet, frighten its whelps?" Pretty much, hey, war's over. If they want to stay, they can stay. It was amended, although in what way is not clear. Still to this day, the bill did pass. Henry worked together with James Madison, a delegate 3 years in Congress, on a number of issues. They differed, though, on state support for Virginia's Protestant churches. Madison, like Jefferson, desired a separation between church and state that meant no public financing of religion, but Henry believed that taxpayers who were Christian should be assessed for their maintenance of the Protestant church of their choice, financing any array of churches in the way that the Anglicanism had been funded in Virginia until the start of the war. Henry was not alone in this belief. Both Washington and Lee supported such plans. According to Thomas Ed Kidd, he said that the biographer of Henry, the General Assessment Plan is one of the many reasons Henry is not more widely esteemed as a founder. For this debate, he seems to have diverted from the progressive flow of history. Pretty much, if you're a Christian or any religion for that matter, if we put it into a modern lens, you would have to tithe as well as pay a tax for the upkeep of your church. So there's that. The General Assembly might have well passed that bill, but in November of 1784, they elected him as governor again.
Bless his heart.
Madison believed that Henry took the position for family reasons. His wife and children were likely quite happy to be in Richmond rather than in Henry County. But the cost of Henry's bill, as Madison got it, postponed to the following year, and eventually it was defeated. Instead, Madison got Jefferson's Statute of Religious Freedoms through the legislature. This law requiring separation from church and state had passed the General Assembly in 1786. Henry's second time as governor was, like we said, 1785, 84, 85. It was more placid than his first period. During his this time, Henry and his family lived at Salisbury in Chesterfield County, which was about 13 miles from Richmond, in an open country house that he rented. Though he had an official residence close to the Virginia capital, it was under construction. The Virginia Assembly had passed legislation for new arms for the militia, and Henry worked with the Marquis de Lafayette to have them sent from France. So French muskets, cannons, swords, pistols, horses. Each county militia was under firm local control, and a state of affairs that had resulted in problems during the war, as local militias refused orders from Henry and other governors when asked to serve out of state or conscript recruits to the Continental Army. So, seeking to bring the militias under central control, the General Assembly passed an act terminating all militia officers' commission and allowing Henry, with the consent of the Governor's Council, to appoint replacements. The Virginia Constitution required that there be recommendation from the county court. Instead of asking the county court, Henry solicited recommendation from prominent citizens in each county, from who he knew. As a result, a near revolt in the counties happened. Citizens protested against the act, saying it was unconstitutional, and counties refused to obey. The law went widely unenforced, and in October of 85, Henry requested the legislature to repeal it, and they complied the following year. During this time, there's also the secession movement for the state of Franklin, which became Tennessee, Northern Carolina, and all that other good stuff. But we get to the portion that is often talked about when we bring Carl on, was his opposition to the Constitution. Henry actually said, or allegedly said, one reason why he did not go to the Constitutional Convention was he smelt a rat, even though he was a delegate. Henry had a record of urging unity, and he was a supporter of the closer bonds between the states. But several factors had eroded Henry's trust in the northern states, including what he deemed Congress's failure to send adequate troops to protect Virginia and the settlers in the Virginia Territory in the Ohio River Valley. He was outraged by the Jay Treaty, which would have ceded exclusive navigation on the Mississippi River to Spain for 25 years. This was in exchange for commercial concessions that would have benefited New England, where where there was growing a separatist movements, Northern secession first. Northern votes were sufficient to relax Jay's negotiating instructions, which had originally forbid restricting America's navigation on the Mississippi to allow him to reach a deal. Southern votes were sufficient to block the treaty's ratification. These events caused Henry and some other Virginia leaders to feel betrayed and have little trust in and good faith in the North. When the Pennsylvania or Constitutional Convention adjourned in September of 1787, George Washington returned home and immediately sent a copy of the new Constitution to Henry and recommending he supported it. Henry was in Richmond for the autumn legislative session as a delegate for Prince Edward County. While thanking Washington for presiding in Philadelphia and for sending the document, he said of it, and I quote, "I have to lament that I cannot bring my mind to accord with the proposed Constitution. The concern I feel on this account is really greater than I am able to express." He hinted, though, that he was still open to changing his mind, and he was able to remain as noncommittal as an opponent of the Constitution, such as Madison and Edmund Randolph, both delegates of Philadelphia, had published their opinions and refined his views. Moose, you want to take over for a second?
Yeah. So Patrick Henry really fought hard against the Constitution. He didn't really stop fighting until I think it was the guarantee that the Bill of Rights would happen.
Right.
And I think before the Bill of Rights became official, it was a very nail-biting moment because you had to have good faith. And as we just talked about, he didn't really have a lot of faith in the North after what happened.
Right.
So,
well, I mean, and this, I'm going to go ahead and interrupt you and jump back into it. He was an anti-federalist. During this time, there were the Papers of the Federalists and Anti-Federalists going back and forth, back and forth. He was the foremost spokesperson for the Anti-Federalist. Henry detailed his objections to all the documents with eloquent reminders of the liberties for which Virginians had fought and the confidences in the state's autonomy. Again, that the centralized federal government could be used to overrule states' rights with the way that it was written then. And the unifying theme of all of Henry's speeches and writings was an abiding fear that any powerful government that was too centralized and too far removed from the citizens would become tyrannical. He denounced the Constitution as clearly a consolidated government that would destroy the rightful powers of the states. Its principles, he continued, were extremely emblematic and dangerous. And the Philadelphia Convention, he asserted, had proposed successful in the other states of accepting ratification along with a slate of proposed amendments. And that's when he was okay with it. He was convinced that individual liberties and Virginia's interest remained at risk. Well, until the Bill of Rights happened, he was, like you were saying, he was,
yeah, he was 100% against it.
Yeah.
And it was just one of those things. They feared that it would be used to trample on states' rights.
Yeah. So anyway, Constitution gets ratified, and once the new government went into operation, many of the Virginians who had supported ratification suddenly found themselves opposed to the new economic Hamiltonian policies that were being enacted. And many of them changed sides. And during the 1790s, the Commonwealth of Virginia experienced a major political realignment in which many of Henry's former anti-federalists joined forces with former opponents to create the new Democratic Republican Party of Jefferson and Madison. But in 1790, Patrick Henry decided that he needed to retire from the legislature and devoted himself to his busy law practice, winning cases in some of the most successful courtrooms appearances and setting precedent for Virginia law. It didn't hurt that he was also sick and his health was declining. By the middle of the decade, his political allegiances swapped a little bit. He was receptive to some of the Virginia Federalists, such as Washington, Lee, and John Marshall. and shared increasing dissatisfaction with the Democratic Republicans led by Jefferson and Madison. Henry declined appointments as Secretary of State, Attorney General, Justice of the Supreme Court, Minister to Spain and France. But he did briefly re-enter politics in 1799 in response to controversies over the representative measures that the Federalists in Congress had enacted against their Democratic Republican rivals. The whole Alien Sedition Acts. But he was equally alarmed by the Virginia and Kentucky resolutions. Essentially, at this point in Henry's life, he's a moderate. Yeah. I'm letting you try to speak, Moose, because I've been talking the entire episode, it feels like.
Oh, it's fine. It's fine. I'm not really. I was learning along with the chat heads tonight. Kind of after in of course 1799 when he went in because of the Alien and Sedition Acts. He didn't really stay for much longer.
Well, he couldn't stay for much longer.
Yeah. Well, we're about to get to that.
Yeah.
His health took another extreme downturn.
And on June 14th, 1799, the Virginia Gazette announced the death of Patrick Henry. Quote, "As long as our rivers flow, our mountains stand," said the Gazette, "Virginia will say to rising generations, emanate my Henry." Okay.
Tune in. I love how you were like, okay, I'm going to let you talk. And as soon as I'm about to be like on June, you're like, well, on June 6th, 1799, he died.
It was the 14th.
The 14th? Well, I was just.
No, you're right. It was June 6th. It was June 6th. 14th when they printed it. My bad. I will say this, and this will be the last thing I say, and I'll let you sign off for us. Jefferson said of Henry after he passed, it is not now easy to say what we should have done without Patrick Henry. He was before us all in maintaining the spirit of revolution.
Can't really top Jefferson. So I guess we'll go ahead and end the show. I feel like that's a perfect place to start. Make sure to please share this episode out. And, of course, email us at scvyouth@gmail.com to be featured in the upcoming episode of Look Around the Confederation this Thursday at 7 p.m. Same Confederate time, same Confederate channel. And tune in maybe for a couple random live streams Saturday. Who knows?
Nope.
Who knows? We might be too busy. But if we're not, we'll try to tune in for a second. But without further ado, no Fumar in the elevator. Good night, everybody.